Welcome to Bashys Corner. Today the subject is Scientology, and my guest is the official spokesperson for Church of Scientology in Denmark, Anette Refstrup. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
Why does Scientology call itself a church?
Well, if you look at what the word church actually means, it's the place where you go to learn about what the Lord says. And it's a connotation which has been going along with religions far longer than the Christian church. You can also say, you could talk about a whole congregation of people and call that a church, a Muslim church, or a Buddhist church, like for the group of people. So it's not because we want to compete with the Christians, who are the ones who mainly call themselves a church these days, but it's because it is a church. It is a religious group where we are working with learning things about ourselves, about the universe, how everything came about, how we relate to that. And also, of course, a church is a house. And we have houses where we then do these kind of religious services.
But can religion be based on science?
Well, that's a good question, because I'm like, when I was young, I was actually not very religious, or I was not also very spiritual. But when I started studying some of the books that Hubbard has written, and Ron Hubbard is the founder of the Scientology religion, he had been traveling in the East when he was young, and then in his when he came back to the US, where he was born, he was doing some university studies about science. He became an engineer, or he did part of the engineering studies, and he applied this very strict scientific approach to the very spiritual knowledge he had found in the East, because he saw there was a lot of knowledge over there. The Vedas, there was a lot of different things that people know about the spirit and how everything started and so on. But they were not really able to do anything with that knowledge. So he was applying this more scientific approach to make a therapy, whatever you want to call it, a methodology where you could work with the spiritual side of life, but in a more scientific way. So for me, this hooking these two things up, the original knowledge and having a more scientific approach to it, makes it very interesting, because it becomes fast. You don't need to sit in a Lama series for years and meditate. You can actually do it quite fast and get a better understanding of yourself as a spirit, and reach higher understanding of the spiritual nature of the universe and the spiritual nature of man. So it's a contemporary religion, because it's kind of take these two things together.
But is it a religion, or is it a movement?
It's definitely a religion. Of course, you can say it maybe started as a movement, because Hubbard wrote the first book about the mind in the 50s, the book called Dynetics. And there was a lot of groups starting. I think over 500 groups started around the US within half a year, where they used the methods in this book. And that is not a religious book. It's a therapy it's a mental science where you work with yourself and find out why do things you have experienced and so on, how and why do they affect you mentally. So at that time you could say it was a movement, but then quite fast it developed into a religion, because as Hubbard and all the people who were working with this mental science that you find in the book Dynetics, they found out that there was a spiritual side to life. Because in Dynetics, we say that man has a mind. I guess we can agree on that. We have a body, and then we have a mind. And in the mind there is an analytical part. That's the thing you are sitting here now evaluating back and forth. What is she saying? Does this make sense? Da, da, da. But then there's also part of the mind that we don't really control. And we call that the reactive mind, because it can be reactivated. And by working with that, you find out that things in the mind can go together. They kind of, if you have something today you don't really like, then maybe there was something which happened when you were a teenager, something, and then early again when you were a kid. But then with working with this method, we also found out that you can actually also go to past lives. And then it suddenly becomes, what is this? What are we talking about now? And that was already in the beginning of the 50s. So Hubbard was asking the question, if you're looking at pictures in your mind and you can remember things from past lives, who are you then? Who is looking at the pictures? And then it becomes religious, because then you're working with the inner core of man, his spiritual beingness and his spiritual awareness. And then it becomes really interesting. And that's when the Scientology religion was formed. And that was in the beginning of the 50s. 54, the first church was established. But already in 52, he started writing the first books about the subject Scientology.
And the Dianetics books. Okay. But he also wrote science fiction novels.
That's true.
So what was he? Was he a religious reformer, or was he a science fiction writer? Or who was this man? What was this man?
See, he was doing a lot of different things in his life. And I mentioned before, he went to the East. He was traveling there when he was a big teenager, which was quite unusual in the 20s, the 1920s. It was not normal that you went to China and walked the Chinese Wall or visited the Lama series or whatever you did, right? So he went there as a teenager. And then when he came back, he went to university, and then through the 30s he was a writer, and he was writing like all kinds of different stories, westerns and krimi and all kinds of different things, which were issued in small pulp magazines, they were called at that time. At that time we didn't have the series in the TV you could see, so you bought these little magazines. And he was writing all kinds of different stories, and some of these were also science fiction and fantasy stories. And that is what really made the foundation for him to be able to work with all the things he did later on, because it was enormously popular, and he got a lot of royalties and income from being a writer. Okay. But also later on, I mean in the 80s, after he had developed all the technologies we are using in Scientology, he wrote another series of science fiction books, which is called Mission Earth. There was first one called Battlefield Earth, which is 3 volumes, and then the big one called Mission Earth, which is 10 volumes. And that was actually written in the 80s, shortly before he died. And that's, you could say, satire over the world as it is, and it's quite entertaining and quite amusing, and some very not religious, I would say, but very good story, because it gives some viewpoints on what is going on this planet and why. So even if even the setting is science fiction, there's a lot of knowledge about man and a very good story included in it also.
Okay, so as I have never read any of this, so what I know about it is it's very limited, but I know he wrote these novels, so
yeah.
Okay.
But clearly his main subject was religion, and that's where he wrote the majority of all the books he wrote, and also where he wrote the majority. He did a lot of lectures. He did over 3,000 lectures, which are recorded and which we are using in the church today. Okay. Over 10,000 articles, books, and so on. So he was quite productive, I would say, in that field.
And there's a quote here. He once said, "We respect man and believe it is worth helping it. We respect you and believe that you too can help." How can Scientology help people, and in which way?
See, it's if you look at the books that I was mentioning before, the method which is described in these books, the mental technology, you can actually alleviate yourself from mental problems you have. Meaning that if you are, let's say you lose somebody, you lose a child, you lose a spouse, you lose a parent, you lose a good friend. Many people get very stuck in such an incident because it's very traumatic. If you have somebody, you suddenly lose them, you were not prepared, and so on. It can be very traumatic. And a lot of people kind of get stuck in that incident, and they cannot really get on with life, or they need to get drugs, because there is nothing which is really releasing this stuck feeling they have. It's just an example. It can be many other things.
Yeah.
In that way, if you use the methods in Dianetics, in Scientology, to address this experience, you are actually able to take away this very stressful part of it. It doesn't mean that you forget the person or anything like that, but that you kind of get stuck in an incident. This you can look at with these methods, and it opens up and you're able to get on with your life. And you remember the good and the bad, but not in a way which hinders you from doing things in your life. That's just one way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's another way is, let's say you have somebody who is on drugs. There's a lot of drugs in our society today, street drugs, all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it can make people unable to operate. It makes them solid, it makes them stony, it makes them less intellectually able and so on. And with some of the methods we have, we can help the person to get rid of all the toxins which is in the body, and then afterwards you work with it spiritually. Why did you start taking drugs in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
What was the problem you were trying to solve? What was the ideas or the things you had going on in your life at that time that made it easier for you to turn to drugs? And then you can get out of it and get on with your life and not have this destructive or this very invalidating approach to life, right?
So what you're saying is that Scientology has tools for helping you through these different types of crisis, life crisis, or
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also, we think man is worthy of help, and we think the biggest right there is the right to help. If you are deprived of your right to help other people, life easily becomes purposeless. It's always the times where you really helped somebody that you think back of as a good time, right? If you help somebody who couldn't manage something on their own and you help them, you feel good about that. And if you take that to a bit broader level, why do people turn to psychiatric medication or to street drugs or to alcohol or other things which kind of takes them away from reality or takes them away from the pain? Why do they do that? It's not because there's no problem, because for sure there is, but we as a society lack tools to help people effectively. Because if we were able to do that, then most people would prefer to have a normal life instead of have a life supported by substitute.
Yeah. Okay. Scientologists like you believe that Mr. Hubbard found answers to some of the most fundamental questions, such as who are we and where did we come from and what is our destiny. Is that not what almost every religion claims? For sure.
For sure. I believe, this is just my personal way of looking at it, but I think there are some truth, there are some awareness and knowledge in this universe which is universal. And religions have different ways of reaching towards that. So let's say there is an eternal truth, there is a knowledge that we can all have. Then religions in different ways are trying to get closer to that truth and understand what is God, what is my relation to God, what is the spiritual universe and all these things. And for sure, Scientology is one route. That's the route I have chosen because it's really effective. You can make a lot in one lifetime. But it's the same thing that is the inner core of all religions, that they have answers and they offer you answers to different of the bigger questions in life.
But so the answers are basically the same, but the routes or the ways to get to these answers are just the different religions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so. I think there are some universal truth, and we just need to work to find it.
Okay. Is that something that is possible for everybody to find? And can you find it early on in life, or do you have to wait until your deathbed to understand everything?
I definitely think it's something everybody who are searching for answers can find. And it's something you can start learning about as a very young person also. You don't need to be dying to get the reality or get the idea that maybe there is something more to it. I'm sure you've heard about people having these experiences of going out of the body. There's a lot of people, and then, or young people who remember things from their past life, and you look into it and it shows out to be true, and can it be true, and what is all these things, right? If you start looking at man as a spirit, that we have a body, we have a mind with all our experiences, good and bad, and da-da-da, but man is a spirit. It gives you other solutions to the problems of man than if you look at man as a piece of flesh. So if you take the approach that there is a spiritual level which is bigger than the physical level, that is more embracive than the physical things that we can easily see and touch, it opens up a whole new line of thinking, a whole new era of solutions to work with. And that's why I became a Scientologist, because I thought that was immensely interesting, that there is more to it than just what we can measure and see, and that it really makes sense if you start working with that you address, let's say the person has a mental problem or he wants to become better. Well, then you work with that as a point of departure, instead of looking at this body may need poison. He has a mental problem, let's give the body some poison, which is not very logical, because the poison you get in the pharmacy or elsewhere is actually not a natural part of your body. So instead of addressing the person through the body, you address him through the mind, and the solutions become very different.
So are you saying that for a Scientologist that you don't approve of the psychiatric medicine for instance, if you have a schizophrenic person or something with other mental issues, that we usually prescribe these kind of drugs to as a Scientologist? You don't approve of that? No,
definitely not. Because you're not helping the person by giving him drugs. You are just putting down, it may be that you are suppressing the symptoms, but you're not handling the cause of the symptoms. And if you look at, there's been a lot of interesting experiments done, not a lot unfortunately, but there has been interesting experiments done with people with schizophrenia. There was a guy in Italy, I don't remember his name now. He got from a psych hospital, in agreement with this psychiatric hospital, 10 of the worst of these people who had the diagnosis schizophrenia. And then he took them to a farm or to a house out in the mountains, and slowly he got them off their medication. He started giving them things to do. He started working with them so they were helping each other and so on. And they all became able to manage on their own without drugs. So I don't say that there are not a few people who are really so mentally traumatized that you need to give them tranquilizers or something else so they can sleep and they can whatnot. But this idea, look at it. In Denmark, 20% of the population is getting some kind of psychiatric medication. I don't believe that there's 20% of the Danish population which are mentally ill. This is simply an industry which has gone way out of control. Because a lot of people, they become drug addicts basically on these things because they take them for the rest of their life, because you cannot get off them, but they are addictive. The happy pills or whatever they are called, lykkepiller, the antidepressants, they are addictive.
Okay, interesting point of view. Let me ask you, how long have you been in the Church of Scientology? And
I started over 30 years ago.
Over 30 years ago. And what made you start? How did you meet Scientology?
It was actually my brother who started. He started reading the book, which is called Dianetics, which is here next to me. And I was really skeptical, because I was almost offended that my brother became new religious. It was not good. There was a lot of bad things in the media and so on at that time. But then my mother said, read some of the books and see what he's doing. She had done the same. She had gone with him to the church and read some books. And so I sat down and read some books. And I actually took this book here. This is called Scientology, The Fundamentals of Thought. And that was the first book I read. And that was like kind of interesting. I was not really... But then I read
there was something about it.
Yeah, there were some answers. There were some new viewpoints and so on. And then I read more books. And then slowly, then I did a course about how to study. I was doing my education at the time. Mm-hmm. So I took a course in how to study, because I could use that during my education. And that also made sense. There was like some really good tools there. And then I started getting some spiritual counseling. And then I've not turned my back since.
So for
I've
you...
not looked back since.
No, for you it was very, very useful.
Yeah.
Seems okay.
Exactly.
Okay, let me ask you why Scientology calls itself a church. I mean, do you have, and you said, well, a church in a broader sense, it's a congregation, but do you have services and do you have prayer halls?
Exactly, we do. We have not so far away from where we are sitting right now, Jernbanegade, we have a big house, and we actually soon, this summer, we're opening a new church also in Nytorv, down here in middle of Copenhagen. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing in these houses, they're quite big, because there are a lot of different things you can do in Scientology. We have the normal services, as you mentioned, like Sunday services, christenings, weddings, funerals, these things. We have them, and whenever it fit in to have these. On Sundays we have the Sunday service, but other things can be other days. But every day, from morning till evening, the course rooms are open. So we have an academy in our church, we call it an academy, where you come to train to be a spiritual counselor. Our spiritual counselors, we call them an auditor. An auditor comes from audire, which means to listen. So you simply educate yourself in how to listen in a very specific codified way. So that's one thing. And then the other thing which goes on in the church is the spiritual counseling. And it's in a small room where the counselor and the person is sitting in front of each other, as we do now. And then you do the spiritual counseling. So that's the things, and they go on. That's no matter what church you would go into around the planet. That's the things which goes on. People are there, they study the books, that's the knowledge. They are there to train, to be educated as spiritual counselors. We call that training. And there is auditing, there is spiritual counseling, which is, where you sit one-on-one and you look at yourself and you find out things about who you are and how things go together. And that's the things which go on. And then, of course, we have all kinds of activities and events and so on for the people who come. It's not only the services, but this goes on, the course rooms, the auditing. That's every day from morning till evening.
Okay, and you're opening a new place later in 2017.
Exactly.
So sounds like the Church of Scientology in Denmark is growing. So now we get to the harder part, because it's not a secret that the Church of Scientology has received a lot of criticism in the media, and there are former members of the church who claim or accuse the Scientology to be a money-making machine. And from what you're saying, it seems that you are growing and you are making money to invest and build. And so what is your answer to this? Any
religion, of course, needs money to survive. We need to have, we need to pay the rent, we need to pay the electricity, we need to pay the phones, we need to pay the salary for the staff. So of course you cannot do it without getting money for doing the things you do. The thing which is, the way we have chosen to do it is that the people who participate most, use the church most, also are the ones who contribute most with donations to the maintenance of the whole activity. So it's not tithes like there are different religions. I think the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, they pay 10 or 15% of their income. That's not how it is with us. People pay compared to how much they participate and how they participate. So it can be very different how much you invest in this activity, and there's a lot of things you can participate in which are very cheap and which doesn't cost anything. So it's an activity which needs to run, and that costs money. There's no secret in that. But it's definitely not the purpose. If I was in it for the money, I guess I would find another job.
Being the spokesperson here hasn't made you a millionaire.
No, I wouldn't say.
No,
not money-wise.
Not money-wise. Okay, but what about other people higher up in the system? Are they making huge economic benefits from being in this organization?
Actually not. You know, we got the religious recognition from the American Internal Revenue Service, tax office, in 93. And at that time, that was the biggest investigation into the finances of any church anywhere on the whole planet, and also into the salaries of the people who are, you could say, the higher executives in our church. And it was found that they don't get more money than the normal employees in the church, and that was a big surprise but that was a surprise that it's actually a very equal system. It's not that there anybody who's getting a lot of money and others don't get anything or something like that. It's what is there is kind of being shared between the people who work for the church.
Is the church recognized as an official religion in Denmark?
No, it's not. It's not like, you know, you have to get this stamp from the Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs here if you want to say that you are a recognized religion. We don't have that. But
are you trying to get it?
Actually, not at the moment. I guess we're going to go into that at some point again. But what do we have now? It's actually 20 years ago we asked the last time. And we didn't get a no, but we withdrew the application at that time because the whole procedure changed. So we had to file a new application, and then we never got around to that in the meantime.
One last question, I think it will be, because time is running out. Yeah. Do you work with other religions?
For sure.
And doing what?
Mainly interreligious activities. Like, as I said, I think all religions has something to offer to this planet. It has a civilizing effect, and I think it's immensely important that religions stand together and work on making it understood that religions have more in common than they have against each other.
Thank you. That will be the last words. Thank you for coming and telling us about the Church of Scientology. That was what we had to show in this program. Thank you for watching.